Well, today I'll be talking about 10 bands that should have been bigger, at least in my opinion. But yeah, with these bands that I chose here, I tried to have a little bit of variety here. Some bands lean more towards rock, while others lean more towards metal. And yeah, you have some older bands here, but you also have some bands that lean more towards being more modern, while some are more towards the middle, you could say. But yeah, this will be in no particular order, but the first band I do want to talk about is Corrosion of Conformity. Definitely one of the most underrated bands of the 90s, but of course they did start off in the 80s, but they really came into their own in the 90s, in my opinion, starting off with Blind. Definitely a band that's had their share of lineup changes, such as with vocalists, but the vocalist that is most associated with this band, or at least the most well-known vocalist that we've gotten from this band, is of course Pepper Keenan. But yeah, also they started off as punk slash crossover, of course starting in the 80s, but they would go in a different direction in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, to me, I think Corrosion of Conformity had a really strong 4-album run, starting off with Blind, then you got Deliverance, Wise Blood, and America's Volume Dealer. Now, the album that they would come out with after this album would be In the Arms of God, which I think is also good, solid, but I personally wouldn't put it on the same level as these 4 albums, though. But that's just my opinion. If you disagree, it's all good. Again, I do still think In the Arms of God is a solid album. But yeah, these are all really good. I mean, I know some fans are maybe not as big on this one because it's maybe a bit more accessible, but I personally really dig the album. But yeah, Corrosion of Conformity, definitely really good bands, and definitely one of those bands that doesn't really sound like anyone else. I mean, definitely have their own unique sound, and Pepper Keenan definitely has his own unique voice. I mean, once he delivers a line, you immediately know that it's him. But yeah, Corrosion of Conformity, definitely a really good band. Definitely check him out if you haven't heard him, especially if you like 90s metal. But now we're going to go ahead and move into some thrash metal with Death Angel. And yeah, to me, this band does have one of the best vocalists in the world of thrash metal. Not only can he do the typical aggressive thrash metal vocals, but he can also sing fairly well too, such as in the song Looking in View, if I got the song title right, that one. And he also did a cover with these other band members from other bands. It was a cover of Chloe Dancer, Crown of Thorns, if I got the song title right. It's a song from Mother Love Bone. If you haven't heard that cover, definitely check it out on YouTube. But either way, definitely one of the best vocalists in the world of thrash, Mark. But to me, I think they had a really good 3-album run with their first 3 albums: The Ultraviolence, Frog Through the Park, and Act 3. Act 3 probably being my favorite. I know some people point to Ultraviolence as their favorite, but personally, I go with Act 3. But all 3 of these albums are definitely great. But yeah, really good stuff. And I think their later stuff is also pretty solid too. But when it comes to their more modern work, their latest album is definitely my favorite of their more modern stuff, Humanicide, which I got signed when I met them last year through VIP. But yeah, if you like thrash and you somehow haven't heard of Death Angel, definitely check them out. Really good stuff, and overall, pretty solid discography, I'd say too. But let's go ahead and move on to the next band. Another band you could say is pretty unique band from the 90s, especially in the world of metal, and that band is Fear Factory. Often considered industrial metal, and the album that most people consider their best, or at least one of their best, is of course their second album, or their sophomore album, Demanufacture. Definitely a really good album, and also my favorite album from them too. I mean, this album would be the start of their concept album trilogy, basically the Man vs. Machine trilogy. You could maybe call it that, but yeah, definitely a really strong album. Definitely one of the best albums of 1995, especially in the world of metal. I mean, so many killer songs like the title track, Self-Biased Resistor, and you also have Replica on here, which is one of their biggest songs, and also the song that got me hooked into this band. You move towards the second half, which is where you get some of the more deeper cuts like Piss Christ and Hunter Killer, which are some of my some of my other favorites on the album. But yeah, all around a really good album. They go into Obsolete, which you start to notice some new metal isms in there, but still feels like Fear Factory though. And this is another album that I think is also one of their best. So many killer songs on here, like Edge Crusher and Freedom or Fire. I do like their cover of Cars too. Then they would end the trilogy with Digimortal, which sees them go all the way into the whole new metal thing. And I personally still really dig this album. I do think that this is another album I think is one of their best. I mean, some people might not be big on track number 8 though, Back the Fuck Up, which of course features a rapper on it. And I'll admit, I kind of dig the song. I mean, yeah, when you go back and listen to it, it does feel a little bit dated, but I kind of like the song, not gonna lie. But there are also some pretty killer songs on here too, such as the title track, Linchpin, What Will Become, and Acres of Skin. But yeah, all around really good stuff. I think they did come out with some more pretty good stuff too after that album, like Archetype, which was one of the albums they did without Dino, and they moved towards their more modern stuff, Mechanized, Genexus. I think those albums are pretty good too. But yeah, Fear Factory, definitely another really good band. Moving to the next band, we're taking it back to the 90s with Helmet. And yeah, another album, or not an album, another band that doesn't really sound like anyone else. They definitely have their own unique sound, thanks to especially their frontman Page Hamilton. But yeah, I think they had a really good run in the 90s with these 4 albums here: Strap It On, Meantime, which is often considered their best, or one of the best. To me, I'd say one of their best. Then you also had Betty, which honestly, Meantime and Betty kind of fight for being my favorite Helmet album, but I might lean more towards Betty, but I don't know. But either way, both really good albums. And then they would end off the 90s with Aftertaste, which I think is also a fairly solid album. After the 90s, they start to get pretty hit or miss for me. Size Matters, to me, was their last really good album, which was their comeback album, which came out in 2004. I think that album's kind of underrated. I personally dig it. Of course, I wouldn't put it on the same level as these 4, but I still think it's a pretty solid album. But after Size Matters, things kind of get very hit or miss really fast for me. But again, their album run in the 90s, again, really good stuff. I mean, when it comes to how would you describe their sound, or like what label you would put them under, I've heard a variety of answers to this. Alternative rock, alternative metal. I mean, I'm not sure what I'd call them, but either way, Helmet, definitely a band worth checking out, especially if you like 90s rock. And Page Hamilton, I can see maybe some people might not being too big on his vocals, but I personally dig his vocals though. You have your more harsher vocals, but you also have your singing too. But yeah, Helmet, another solid band. Moving to the next band, a band that I've considered many times one of the most underrated bands on the planet, and a band that I feel should have been bigger, of course, and that band is King's X. And these 3 albums to me are the band's best. This album, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. And you also have the self-titled, which I think is also really good. And then probably my favorite from the band, Dogman, which is maybe their heaviest. Definitely really good stuff. This is another band that's kind of tough to label or describe. I mean, they're a band that never really repeats themselves with their albums, and the fact that they're able to do that without releasing any bad albums is definitely impressive. I mean, of course, there are albums that are stronger than others. I mean, you move towards some of their later stuff. Manic Moonlight, not one of their strongest, but I think it's okay. Ogre Tones, I think, is also all right, but maybe not one of their best. But King's X is definitely a really good band. They've been around since, I want to say, the mid-'80s, maybe earlier. I can't remember. I want to say it was around the mid-'80s, but either way, King's X, definitely another pretty unique band. And yeah, definitely check them out if you haven't heard them. But moving to the next band, we'll be moving to one of the bigger names in the world of gothic metal, and that band is Lacuna Coil. I mean, they especially had a really good run in the 2000s, in my opinion. But the albums that are often, I mean, from what I've seen, at least, they're often considered some of the band's best work, and it's these 2 albums, Comalies and Karma Code. And this album especially has grown to be probably one of my favorite albums of all time. I mean, this really is an album you can listen to from front to back with no issue. Absolutely love this album. But Como Elise is also really good too. This was the album that really got them their big commercial success. But something with Lacuna Coil is that, at least when it comes to female-fronted bands that were big around this time, especially in the 2000s, they never really got the same numbers as other bands like the same numbers of other female-fronted bands like Evanescence or Paramore or stuff like that, which is unfortunate because, again, definitely a band that should have been bigger. I mean, their take on gothic metal, really good stuff. And I know some people are maybe not big on the male vocals in this band, but I personally like his voice. Now, when it comes to the growls that he does on their more recent stuff, that can be hit or miss for me, but that could be it for a whole different video or a whole separate video. But these two albums are definitely must check outs in my opinion, especially if you like gothic metal or even 2000s rock or 2000s metal. Again, really good stuff, especially this album. But they would go in a slightly different direction. Still feels like Lacuna Coil, of course, but they would start working with Don Gilmore with these two albums, Shallow Life and Dark Adrenaline, which I think are also pretty good. Definitely on the more accessible side, especially this album, but still, I think these albums are also pretty good. You definitely notice from after these albums, they start to get a bit heavier, starting off with Broken Crown Halo, if I got the title right. But yeah, Lacuna Coil, another really good band, and definitely should have been bigger for sure. And also, of course, if you like Evanescence, definitely check out Lacuna Coil, especially Como Elise and Karma Code. But moving to the next band, a band that's often considered a one-hit wonder. They also, I mean, I think they've been nominated. They've had some of their songs be nominated for stuff, but of course, they're most associated with the hit song Cult of Personality, and of course, the band I am talking about is Living Colour, and their early stuff is definitely really good. Time's Up, Vivid, and Stain are all really good. But Vivid is the album that's probably their most commercially successful album, especially with the hit single Cult of Personality, but you also have some other really good songs on here, like Open Letter to a Landlord, which is definitely a top 5 Living Colour song for me, and also one of their best singles. But you also have some pretty good deep cuts here, like Desperate People. But and Glamour Boys is a solid song too. But yeah, Vivid, pretty good debut album. You also have Time's Up, which personally I don't like as much as Vivid, but still another fairly solid album for them. But honestly, nowadays, this album and Vivid kind of fight for being my favorite from them. With this album, they go a bit heavier and also a bit darker, and I personally really dig the album a lot. I mean, so many killer songs on here. Ignorance is Bliss, Leave It Alone, which I think is one of their best singles. Auslander, Nothingness, which I think is honestly maybe my favorite of their ballads. I really like that song a lot. Wall I think is probably one of their best album closers, but definitely really dig the direction that they went on this album. You move towards their later work, which for me is kind of just okay. Nothing bad, but kind of mid to okay. But yeah, Living Colour, another really good band. Moving to the next band, we'll be going to Red. And yeah, if you're a fan of a band like Linkin Park especially, then you should definitely check out Red, especially their debut album right here, End of Silence. Now, when it comes to my favorite albums from this band, it's definitely the first two albums, End of Silence and Innocence and Instinct. This album, the second album, probably being my favorite. But yeah, both really good stuff. I mean, you definitely get some of the band's best work on these albums, like songs like Death of Me, Breathe Into Me, Let Go, Already Over, Break Me Down, Pieces, which is probably my favorite of their ballads. I think Confession is probably another one of my favorite songs from the band too. Shadows is also really good, but you move towards their later stuff. I think Until We Have Faces is also really good. Then you have their more divisive album, Release the Panic, which I personally dig. Definitely maybe their most different album, either that one or an album that they would do later, that album being Gone. Either that album or Release the Panic is their most different sounding album, but I do like both those albums. But You also get another album that I think is also one of their best later in their career with Of Beauty and Rage, another really strong album from them. But it really, ever since Gone, I mean, the albums have not been as strong, but still solid though. I mean, you get Declaration, which is maybe their heaviest album, and then you move to their most recent album, Rated R, which I got this signed copy from the band's online store, and the album's okay, but nowadays I might put it as their weakest. But Red, another really good band. If you like modern rock, definitely check them out. Really good stuff. And Michael Barnes, definitely a really great vocalist. And I mean, especially if you're a fan of Chester Bennington, then you should definitely be pleased by his vocals, especially with those early albums too. But I think he still also sounds great too. Definitely has a great singing voice, but also has a great scream. But moving to the next band, we'll be diving into the world of nu metal and one of the early bands in the genre too, that band being Sevendust. So yeah, to me, definitely maybe one of the best album runs in the world of nu metal. I mean, their first 4 albums I think are definitely one of my favorite 4 album runs maybe ever. Starting off with the self-titled, and then you also have Home, which is my favorite out of all their albums. Then you have Animosity, which is definitely their big album, and then you have Seasons. So yeah, their TVT albums are definitely really good, which is of course the label that they were on for these albums. And they would go on to put out other really great albums too, such as Blackout the Sun and All I See Is War and Truth Killer. But yeah, these 4 albums especially are definitely really good. And Lajohn's vocals, I mean, he definitely has a really great singing voice, and definitely one of the more unique vocalists in the world of nu metal, I'd say. And I did see them live earlier this year too, and they definitely put on a great show. But yeah, definitely a band that from the nu metal era that definitely should have been bigger in my opinion. I mean, and they continue to put out quality work in my opinion. Sometimes things start to maybe blend together here and there, maybe if you were to get a little bit nitpicky, but still either way, definitely a really great band. Definitely one of my favorite bands in the world of nu metal. Now for the final band for this video, we'll be diving into one of the Canadian Big Four of thrash. That band is Voivod. Now with this band, I can definitely understand why they maybe weren't as big as some other big names in the world of thrash, but at the same time, I feel like the band has shown that they can infuse their style in a more, they can show their style in a more accessible way, especially with these 3 albums, Nothing Face, Angel Rat, and The Outer Limits. But yeah, definitely one of the most unique bands in the world of thrash. Except with them, it's more of a mix of prog metal and thrash metal, you can maybe say. But I mean, my favorite album from them is probably this album, Nothing Face, which is definitely one of the fan favorites in their catalog. But they would go on to put on some other really great albums too, like The Outer Limits, of course. And their last album, I think, was also really good, Synchro Anarchy. Definitely probably maybe my favorite when it comes to their more modern work. But you dive into their 90s stuff, yeah, you get Angel Rat, which is maybe their most accessible sounding album. And then you also have The Outer Limits, which again I think is also one of their best. And then you also have those 2 albums with Eric Forrest, if I got the name right, who replaces Snake for the 2 albums, Negatron and Phobos. But yeah, Voivod, definitely one of the most unique bands in the world of thrash, and their combination of prog and thrash, definitely a really interesting combination, and yeah, really good stuff. I mean, if you haven't heard them, definitely check them out. Really solid band. But yeah, those are 10 bands that I feel should have been bigger. Let me know your thoughts on these 10 bands in the comment section below. Let me know if you can think of more bands that you think should have been bigger and all that good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day and take care.